The Arawak people, often painted as peaceful farmers in history books, embarked on an epic journey that would shape the cultural tapestry of the islands we now associate with sun-soaked beaches and pirate lore. But where did they come from? And how did their migration transform them? In 2022, a genomic breakthrough rewrote the map of America's ancient past. Researchers sequenced the genomes of two individuals from northeast Brazil, known as Brazil 2 and Brazil 12. Together, their DNA formed a genetic fingerprint that pointed in a surprising direction. Maximum likelihood analyses grouped these individuals into a unique clade, separate from ancient South American Pacific coastal populations' peoples. Brazil 2 was an ancestor to an ancient Panamanian, suggesting that there was an ancient migration from the Amazon along the Atlantic and Caribbean coast back to Panama. Imagine a people setting out from the dense, humid jungles of the Amazon, their hand-hewn canoes slicing through muddy rivers, their eyes fixed on a horizon they couldn't yet see. Who were these bold voyagers, and what drove them to leave the lush cradle of South America for the uncharted waters of the Caribbean? The Arawaks, also known as the Taino in their Caribbean phase, trace their origins to the vast and vibrant Amazon region of South America. This sprawling ecosystem, teeming with life and crisscrossed by rivers, was more than just a backdrop. It was a crucible that forged their identity. Archaeological evidence suggests that their ancestors were part of the Saladoid culture, a group of skilled horticulturalists who emerged around 2,000 years ago in what is now Venezuela and the Guianas. A map of language groups in the region reveals the Arawak's linguistic dominance, with Arawakan languages stretching across vast swaths of the Amazon basin, from the Orinoco River in the north to the Jurua River in the southwest. This linguistic spread hints at a cultural influence that was far-reaching. But what does this tell us about their nature? Did their language spread through peaceful trade and intermarriage, or through conquest and displacement? The map also shows the Arawaks surrounded by other linguistic groups, the Carib to the northeast, the Tupi to the southeast, and the Macro-G and Panoan groups scattered throughout. This mosaic of cultures suggests a dynamic environment where competition for resources was inevitable. The Rio Negro, a vital artery of the Amazon, cuts through Arawak territory, placing them in direct contact with Carib speakers. Could these early encounters have foreshadowed the rivalries that would later erupt in the Caribbean? The Arawak's proximity to groups like the Tupi, who also migrated extensively, raises another question. Were the Arawaks pushed northward by pressure from these neighbours, or were they the ones doing the pushing? Another map, this one highlighting crop diversity, provides a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Amazon wasn't just a battleground of languages, it was a cradle of agriculture. The Arawak's homeland overlapped with regions rich in domesticated plants such as manioc, cassava, near Porto Velho and the Amazon River, and sweet potatoes along the Orinoco. Manioc, a starchy root that can thrive in poor soils, was a cornerstone of their diet, and its cultivation gave them a portable food source for their northward journey. Picture Arawak women grinding manioc into flour, their hands stained with its bitter juice as they prepared for the next leg of their migration. Did this agricultural expertise give them an edge over less sedentary groups, or did it make them targets for those who coveted their harvests? The crop diversity map also shows Brazil nuts and guarana in the eastern Amazon, near where Arawak and Carib territories met. These resources weren't just sustenance. They were trade goods, potential catalysts for both cooperation and conflict. Did the Arawaks barter Brazil nuts with their Carib neighbours, or did these valuable crops spark raids and skirmishes? The presence of kako in the western Amazon, near western Arawak territory, adds another layer. Kako was a prized commodity, often used in rituals and as currency in later Mesoamerican cultures. Pineapple also was cultivated by the Arawaks in the Amazon, which they brought to the Caribbean. Could the Arawaks have been early traders of cacao, using it to forge alliances as they moved north? Their agricultural prowess, evident in the diversity of crops they cultivated, suggests a people who were more innovators than invaders, more likely to plant than to plunder. By around 2,500 years ago, the Arawaks began their migration, paddling up the Orinoco River and fanning out into the Caribbean Sea. Their canoes, carved from massive trees, carried not just people but a way of life, pottery techniques, manioc cultivation, and a language that would echo across the islands. The Arawaks' canoes, some up to 130 feet long and made from a single dugout tree trunk, cut through the waves like arrows, their warriors chanting a rhythmic song meant to bolster their spirits and strike fear into their foes. The Taino and Arawak, with their well-proportioned physiques honed by a life intertwined with nature, moved with a grace that seemed otherworldly. Their jewelry, made of polished shells, stones, and gold, caught the sun's rays, enhancing their already striking appearance. Body piercings adorned their noses and ears, a testament to their artistry and connection to the divine. Picture the scene. Families huddled together, navigating treacherous currents, their children peering over the edges as the first glimpses of Trinidad or Tobago emerged from the mist. How must it have felt to leave the familiar for the unknown? This wasn't a haphazard wanderlust. It was a deliberate invasion, a colonization of new frontiers that would stretch over centuries. The Orinoco, a lifeline connecting their Amazonian past to their Caribbean future, was a highway of culture, crops, and conflict. When we hear invasion, we often conjure images of clashing swords and burning villages. But was the Arawak arrival in the Caribbean truly an invasion, or something more subtle, a gradual infiltration of culture and crops? By 1500 years, they had established themselves across the Lesser Antilles, pushing northward to Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and beyond. Their settlements dotted the islands like stars in a constellation, each one a testament to their adaptability. They brought with them the knowledge of cassava, a starchy root that became a staple, and a cosmology rich with spirits and deities. But did they encounter resistance? Were there others already living on these islands? And if so, what happened to them? Evidence points to the presence of earlier inhabitants, like the Siboney or pre-ceramic peoples, who may have been hunter-gatherers. Did the Arawaks peacefully absorb these groups, or did their arrival spark conflict? Some archaeologists argue that the expansion was marked by competition for resources, land, fishing grounds, and fertile soil. Pottery shards and tools unearthed across the Caribbean hint at a sophisticated society, but they don't suggest a warrior culture. So why then did Christopher Columbus, upon meeting them in 1492, describe them in terms that suggested a warlike people? Was projecting his own beliefs onto a people he barely understood, or was this justification for colonization? The Arawak migration wasn't a single event, but a slow, relentless wave. By 1,000 years ago, they had transformed into the Taino, a distinct Caribbean culture with chiefdoms, ball courts, and intricate social structures. Their villages, built around central plazas, buzzed with activity. Women grinding cassava, men fishing in dugout canoes, children chasing each other through the palms. But beneath this idyllic surface was there a martial undercurrent. The Taino faced threats from another group, the Caribs, who were moving into the Lesser Antilles around the same time. The language map shows the Caribs' origins near the Rio Negro, not far from Arawak territory. Did these ancient neighbours bring old grudges with them to the islands, or were their clashes a new chapter in an ongoing rivalry? Fast forward to October 1492. Christopher Columbus, an obscure Italian navigator with grand ambitions, steps onto a Bahamian island he names San Salvador. His journals brim with descriptions of the people he meets, the Arawaks, or Taino as they were by then. He calls them Los Hijos en Dios, meaning the children of God. En Dios sounded like Indians to the English, and 500 years later the name is still used. He writes of their generosity, their nakedness, and their apparent simplicity, but he also hints at something darker. In one entry, he notes their fear of the Caribs, suggesting they were victims of raids and cannibalism. Elsewhere, he implies they themselves could be fierce when provoked. Columbus made repeated remarks about Arawak, who claimed to have been attacked by Caribs. I saw Arawaks with wound marks on their bodies, and I made signs to them, asking what they were, and they showed me how people from other islands nearby came there and tried to take them, and how they defended themselves, Columbus wrote on the first day of his visit to the Bahamas. Another account describes how a group of Arawaks sailing between islands on one of the Spanish ships reacted when they spotted an island they assumed was populated by Caribs. The Arawaks stated that this land was huge and that it was home to both those with one eye in the forehead and those they referred to as cannibals. They were terrified, and they were silent, he says, because those people ate them and are very warlike. A related tale describes how, upon witnessing a specific island, the Arawaks were speechless, fearing that they would be eaten, and a crew member could not calm their terror, and they said that the people there had only one eye and the face of a dog. So which was it? Were the Arawaks the docile innocents of popular imagination, or did they harbour a violent streak that Columbus exaggerated or invented? Columbus's accounts are our earliest written record of the Arawaks, but they're hardly unbiased. He was a man on a mission to justify his voyage, secure funding, and paint the New World as both a paradise and a place ripe for conquest. His descriptions oscillate wildly. One moment, the Arawaks are so naive and so free with their possessions that they'd make perfect servants. The next, he's speculating about their capacity for resistance. Did he actually witness Arawak aggression, or was he parroting rumours from his interpreters, perhaps Arawaks themselves warning him about their Carib foes? The truth hangs tantalizingly out of reach, obscured by the fog of colonial agendas. Let's unpack his claims. Columbus writes that the Arawaks bore scars from battles with the Caribs, who allegedly cut off limbs and ate their captives. If true, this paints the Arawaks as defenders, not instigators. Yet he also suggests they had weapons, bows, arrows, and wooden clubs, and could be taught to fight for Spain. Was this an observation of their martial skill, or a wishful projection of his own imperial dreams? Archaeological digs have turned up little to suggest the Arawaks were a warlike society. Their tools were primarily for farming and fishing, not conquest. So why the disconnect? Did Columbus misread their cultural practices, or were the Arawaks more complex than their peaceful reputation allows? To answer this, let's circle back to their Amazonian roots. The Saladoid culture that birthed the Arawaks thrived in a region where survival demanded resilience. The Amazon wasn't a gentle Eden, it was a battleground of floods, predators, and rival tribes. Did this environment breed a latent aggression that carried over into their Caribbean lives? The language map shows the Arawaks' dominance, but it also highlights their neighbours, the Caribs, Tupi, and others. These groups weren't just linguistic rivals, they were competitors for the same rivers, forests, and fields. The crop diversity map underscores this competition, with overlapping regions of manioc, sweet potatoes, and Brazil nuts. Did these shared resources foster trade, or did they ignite conflict? In the Amazon, the Saladoid people clashed with neighbours like the Caravan-speaking groups, who may have been ancestors of the Caribs. These encounters likely involved skirmishes over territory, riverbanks rich with fish, forests thick with game. The Arawaks' mastery of ceramics and agriculture gave them an edge, but did they win through force or finesse? By the time they reached the Caribbean, their toolkit was more about sustenance than slaughter. Their iconic Zemi figures, stone and wood carvings of spirits, speak to a spiritual life, not a militaristic one. Yet the Caribs' arrival in the islands complicates the picture. Were the Arawaks forced to adapt, to pick up weapons they'd once laid down? The Taino, as the Arawaks became, organized into chiefdoms led by caciques, a structure that implies some level of coercion or control. Disputes over land or tribute could have sparked internal conflicts. But the evidence, burials, settlements, oral traditions, leans toward cooperation over combat. When the Caribs raided, the Taino fought back, as any people would. Does self-defense make them warlike, or were they simply caught in a cycle of violence not of their making? Columbus's lens, clouded by his European Middle Ages worldview, may have magnified these moments into a portrait of savagery. So was Columbus right? Were the Arawaks violent invaders, or victims of a brutal mischaracterization? The answer lies somewhere in the grey expanse between. Their invasion of the Caribbean was less a blitzkrieg than a slow bloom, a spreading of roots across islands over centuries. Their Amazonian origins, as seen in the language and crop maps, suggest toughness, yes, but not bloodlust. They were builders, not destroyers, farmers who turned swamps into gardens, fishers who mapped the reefs. The Caribs, their foil in this drama, may have forced them into a defensive posture, but that's a far cry from the warlike stereotype. Columbus's descriptions, then, seem more like a mirror of his own mind than a window into Arawak reality. He saw what he wanted to see, a people ripe for exploitation, yet dangerous enough to warrant subjugation. His tales of their violence likely drew from Carib raids, which the Arawaks endured rather than instigated. The scars he noted were real, but they were badges of survival, not conquest. Why, then, has this image lingered? Perhaps because it fit the colonial narrative, a justification for the horrors that followed. What if we'd heard the Arawak's side? Their voices, silenced by history, might tell of pride in their journey, sorrow at their losses, and defiance against the invaders who came after Columbus. Their migration from the Amazon to the Caribbean was an act of courage, not carnage. They didn't storm the islands with fire and steel, they planted them with cassava and dreams. Thank you for watching and commenting, and please subscribe to the channel for more content.